Welcome back, guys, to the Doyle D'Angelo Show. My name is Doyle D'Angelo, and I am your host today. We have a lot to talk about. Yesterday's games, obviously, we had the Spurs and the Wolves, and then we also had the Knicks and the 76ers facing off. And, well, I think the start of the semifinals was definitely interesting. I don't think everyone was expecting the Wolves and the Spurs to kind of be like that matchup that kind of gave us the thrills in the beginning, but it definitely delivered, and I think it's going to be a good series for sure. Of course, there's some things there. I don't think Wemby's going to have another bad offensive game like that for the rest of the series, so we'll kind of get into that. But man, the Knicks, the Knicks have looked like serious business over the last couple games, last 4 games or so, and we'll kind of get into those things as well, and just some of what a lot of this means, for the rest of the series, and then just some trends that we're seeing kind of going into these games. So yeah, let's get into it. I mean, the Knicks, they ended up beating the 76ers, who, obviously are just coming off of that game seven, where they won by 9 points, 109 to 100. They come into this game, they come into New York, and they just get mollywopped. Honestly, I mean, it was ugly from the beginning. You kind of got a sense that this team wasn't really ready to play, which is kind of a cliche thing to say. I know, team coming off of a game seven, but they really did not look like they were ready emotionally, physically, tactically. Only having like a day or so to prepare. I mean, I think that really kind of came into play here. So, you know, I think those things kind of showed up. But the Knicks picked up where they left off from the Atlanta series. I mean, you're talking about their last 4 games. Their last 4 playoff games, they've won by an average of over 33 points. An average, right? So it means that we know some of these games have been won by more points. It seems like they have found a deeper well of offense that we really haven't seen this Knicks team have. I mean, obviously over the years we've seen this Knicks team and this Knicks core score really well, but their identity has really been defense a lot, and they have like these offensive spurts, but they're kind of like a grimy, gutted out type of roster. And I think that this team might be making a transition into something else under Mike Brown. Um, so really, honestly, I mean, this game was over in the first half. Jalen Brunson comes out and he's just scorching hot. He's masterful. He scored 14 of the first 24, and he scored or assisted on 19 of their first 24 points. Um, he scored the last 11 points to in the second half, right? Just huge buckets that honestly, I would say the way that he started and the way that he finished the first half was really what put the 76ers out, because it was just so dominant. It was just shot after shot, from so many different angles, from three, from inside, and the mid range. Jalen Brunson's game is pretty complete. So, you're talking about the ultimate playoff riser. you know, we need to start talking about this guy well. We need to start talking about him the way we should. Some people are like, well, yeah, Jalen Brunson's he's good, but no, this guy is great. Okay, especially for how well he performs in the playoffs and how often and how clutch he is. I mean, I just definitely give him his props. 27 in the first half, ended up with 35 points on 66% shooting, which is absurdly dominant, right? So once again, he really set the tone for this team in the first quarter, and they did not stop from there. And I think when your star kind of comes out and balls out like that, it's really hard for the rest of the team to not get behind him and to feed off of that momentum and that energy, especially when you're at home, right? The crowd's feeding off that energy as well, and we all know how rockin' MSG is. So they banded around him. I think another thing too, you're kind of looking at it, Carl Anthony Towns, I mean, he poses such a problem, and they've been running the offense through him. And I think it's a good thing to do, because he is starting to understand just how powerful he can be and just how good of a player he really can be if he just imposes his will a little bit. And if he uses and leverages his ability to shoot the three to actually open things up for his teammates, and that's exactly what's been going on lately. You have to account for his shooting ability. You have to account for his ability to pass the ball, which he's been more willing lately. He seems much more sure of himself lately, aggressive, one pointed. He had 17 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists on 7 of 11 shooting. So very efficient. He did need to score a lot, but he scored very well. I think if Cat keeps playing like this, they're going to go to the NBA Finals because we know that for this Knicks team, they have everything. They don't have any holes in their roster. The biggest X factor is Cat, and if he can really play to the level that we know he can play at. And lately, he's been doing it, and they've been running the offense through him. Um, so, and then you kind of look at the rest of the guys, Ananobi was amazing. He was so confident on all three levels in the first half. Weirdly getting downhill effectively, I should say, working the mid range, efficient from deep. He was 7 of 8 from the field for 18 points, and he was a plus 22. So, I think when you're getting contributions from your role players like that to go with the explosion of your stars, like you become almost unbeatable, right? I mean, Ananobi going 7 of 8, that's a tough draw. Um, even first, um, I should say, even 5 first round picks, Mikael Bridges showed up efficiently, going 7 of 10 from the field for 17 of his own. So you sort of get the sense that Mike Brown, who we sort of forget, is a two-time, not one, but two-time Coach of the Year. You sort of get the sense that he is really figuring things out. Some of the notes that I have here is, he's maximizing the play of the roster. He's getting Jalen in the pick and roll, running the offense through Cat by floating him on the block and being a willing passer, but also being an assured slasher as well. I think having the team kind of spread the ball around and having the team run the pick and roll with their two bigs and Anobi and Mitchell is also huge. Let alone to say that this team has a defensive identity, right? So I think whereas it initially seemed like Mike Brown may not have been the best fit, or maybe there was questions about if he was a good fit for this team, especially because of just how good Tibbs was and how far he took them, and really, just knowing that they should have gone to an NBA Finals last year. I think that Mike Brown is starting to really come into his own, and he's really starting to put his fingerprints on what he wants this team to look like and what this team should look like. So, we shall see. I think this team is destined for a trip to the finals. Nothing is given, and I think the Sixers will be back in Game 2. But I think the way that Mike Brown has been having this team play lately has been very, very positive and very good. So, you know, I think we should definitely from here give Mike Brown the benefit of the doubt. Kind of moving on to the Sixers. The Sixers, they just didn't really have it from the beginning. Their ball movement and just the depth of the Knicks kind of overwhelmed the Sixers coming off that game 7. There's kind of a lack of defensive identity. There's a lack of defensive structure and presence, honestly, for the Sixers. Embiid was getting cooked, right? He was getting cooked by Cat. And, you know, Cat is a big guy. When he drives, he's kind of everywhere sometimes. But man, he was just rolling past Embiid. And, I'm not entirely sure if it's the injuries or if it's just some of his age showing, but he just really couldn't keep up. They also could not handle the amount of switching and the amount of pick and rolls that the Knicks were rolling with. So, you know, Paul George, he kind of kept filling the game with his shot making and distribution in the second quarter. But he was their best player, I would say last night. With 17 on 54% shooting. Um, but I think when your top two scores score 17 and 14, you're kind of destined to fail there. That's just not enough production. Maxi, who we talked about, who had an amazing game seven and plays really well against the Knicks. He had a really good Celtics series. I mean, just obviously he's one of the better players in the NBA. He only took 9 shots and he was a minus 28. That can't really happen for the Sixers. He was anemic, and I think sometimes his blistering play style can kind of work against him. It's like where a good thing becomes a bad thing. Um, I don't know. I think you'd like to see him play a little bit more measured at times when the game calls for it, because sometimes teams do a really good job of kind of cutting off that really explosive player, and then they kind of have to work, in between the lane. So I think he needs to use more of that because he can do that. I mean, Maxi has a complete game; he could do that. So I think that's what we should expect from him in game two. Edgecomb, he didn't really get going. It was hard for him to kind of find space on the court and to get into a rhythm, really. Um, I think the Knicks were kind of all over him. So the Sixers, they had 5 players with a minus 20 or worse. Yeah. Not going to win like that, especially not in the playoffs. But I will say, just considering how bad this game was and the fact that they were coming off of a hard game seven against the Celtics, I do expect the Sixers to show up in a big way in game two. Um, and one last thing, this is kind of just like a side, but why are we still allowed to hack a Shaq or hack a Mitch? I mean, it's just, come on, guys, what are we doing? Like, this just shouldn't be a part of the game. I understand it's strategy. Some people will say, well, it's a chess match, whatever. But when you're watching the game, I don't think anybody wants to sit there and watch a team foul one guy and then watch a guy miss a bunch of free throws. It's just like, dude, come on. Like, win the right way. Beat this team straight up. Don't start hacking this guy on purpose. Um, because it kind of shows that like you can't win. You don't have the right defensive game plan. You don't have the right offensive game plan. Something's not working that you have to foul this guy constantly, right? To kind of like turn the tides a little bit and bring the game back into order. So I don't think teams should be able to do that. I think it hurts the competition, and I think it's I don't know. I think it's kind of like a loophole in the game that shouldn't be exploited, and we shouldn't allow it to be exploited either. Um, so I don't know. That's just my opinion on it. But we digress. We go on to the T Wolves and the Spurs. Now this game was amazing. Back and forth the whole time. It was kind of a defensive battle, defensive struggle, and I think that's great. We love these sort of games. Sometimes it's good to see two teams really duke it out and not have all the answers on offense because it kind of just makes the offensive production and the offensive, the shots that they make a little bit more valuable in that way. So, the T Wolves ended up winning 104 to 102. Um, let's just start with Anthony Edwards. I mean, this guy is coming off of a knee injury. We didn't expect him to play in this game, um, but he provides quick juice off the bench. I mean, you're kind of looking at Ant, and then you're kind of looking at just how this game played out. The Spurs and the Wolves. They went tit for tat in the beginning of the fourth. Edwards kind of came out with like two huge threes, right? Back to back. One was right in Wemby's face. I mean, he just kind of pulled up, sized him up, kind of crossed him up a little bit, and shot right over him. I mean, that's hard to do. We all know getting around Wemby is one of the hardest things for any NBA player to do. So, that was a sure sign that, oh man, like Ant's here, man. He's playing. Even without being 100%, Edwards came out hot in the fourth quarter. He scored 11 midway through it. He was playing patiently, weaving through the Spurs defense, getting by the stalwart that we know in Wemby, crossing defenders up, I should say, chirping at Keldon Johnson after hitting a big shot over him. You know, I don't know, just the energy, the swagger, and the spatial impact that Anthony Edwards has is just so obvious, right? And it's so clear. He's just different, man. Just the energy that he brings and the full package that he has, even on a bum knee. So that was huge. Um, Now, there was a big turnover that he did commit at the end of the game. Harper basically turns him over, and then it almost cost the Wolves the game because Champagne he couldn't hit the wide open three at the end of the game, but it was wide open. It was a good shot. He definitely could have won that game there at the end for them. So you know, I think kind of looking at this entire game, Wemby did not have it on offense tonight at all. Um, but he was so good on the defensive end. You know, he had 15 rebounds, I should say. But considering the fact that he shot so poorly and the fact that the Wolves barely scraped by, I'd say they're going to need more minutes from Ant going forward because Wemby isn't likely to have back-to-back games like that. It was probably as bad as Wemby could have played on offense, and they still had a chance to win at the end. So I don't think that's necessarily great news for the Wolves, and I think that the Spurs probably do have the better roster. Um, but yeah, kind of just looking at the rest of the guys, the Wolves, they got some good contributions from Conley and Gobert. They both kind of had a stretch in the second quarter that was pretty impactful. Gobert's presence really does carry weight, and I think Conley was distributing the ball well, kind of like his playoff instincts, that veteran presence, kind of shown through a lot in this game, making some key buckets. But Gobert really led the charge in the first half, well, really in the first quarter, really with just like some second chance points, with his rebounding, with his smothering defense, right? I think he matches up well with Wembanyama. I think that's something that we sort of saw. Like Wembanyama, it's a little bit harder for him to dominate the team when you have I think, four-time defensive player of the year, right across from you. Wembanyama's like, I'm a good defender, but Gobert is like, hey, I've got more accolades, buddy. I've been here longer, so buckle up. It's going to be a tough series. And I think it's great, man, seeing two big guys who are really just good defenders kind of go at it. So I think for both guys, it's going to be a tall task to get offensive production, but seeing the defensive battle is going to be pretty awesome. Um, I think also similar to Cat, obviously two different players, but I think Gobert played with a little bit more confidence and energy on offense, at least, in the first quarter, in the first half. It is more than what we're used to seeing. So, it isn't high volume, but it is more active. And I think ultimately that's a good thing for the Wolves. Um, just kind of round it out here, I think Shannon is another one of those players that kind of just jumps off the screen. I think he was really big last night. He was constantly getting buckets through the lane. And he kind of just plays with like a certain level of speed and a certain level of energy that's sort of akin to a Westbrook, right? He wasn't crazy efficient, but the level of energy that he brings is infectious and impactful for this team. I think at one point you could see Ant telling Shannon, "Hey, keep doing it," and I think he scored 16, but it felt like more at times. And once again, I think Ant is kind of pushing him to do that more because, like, when he comes off the bench and well, he's starting now, but like coming off the bench and he brings that energy, that's what allows teams to win championships. We even you go back to the 2016 Warriors or the Warriors dynasty in general, it wasn't just the fact that they had Clay, Steph, Draymond, and then eventually KD. It was those guys coming off the bench that absolutely broke the back of defenses and other teams. I mean, like the Sean Livingston's, the Leandro Barbosas of the world. Like those guys would just, it was just like, come on. Like once those guys like hit two or three threes in a row, you're like, all right, like this game is over. There's just no way you can win. So the role players are huge. And then lastly, of course, got to talk about Randall. Randall was efficient enough, from inside the paint and the mid range. He didn't force the ball tonight. I think that's sometimes a big problem for Randall is he tries to be the number two too much sometimes. But he played really well. He played the way he should as a number two. 21 points to 10 rebounds. That's perfect, right? I think he led the team in scoring that way also. So yeah, man, I think we'll kind of round this out with the Spurs, but man, getting back to Wemby, his defensive presence is unreal, man. Even when his offensive game isn't working, which is a rarity, we should say, he can kind of flip the momentum with a block at any time. And, there's just so much to account for with Wemby. 7 blocks in the first half, insane. And he had 12 blocks total, which is the most in NBA playoff history. So Wemby's an animal in the paint. I mean, we know this, but this game was just extraordinary. Um, you know, Although something the Wolves did very well, and I applaud Coach Finch for this, is how they brought Wemby out of the paint. And when they brought him out of the paint on defense in the second half, it opened up the lanes for their ball handlers, and they were able to get some opportunities in the paint by moving him around. And I think this is a big thing for other teams is you can't allow Wemby to just sit there and be in the paint because if he's just sitting there in the paint and kind of roaming around, like he's going to make impact plays all day long. You have to get him off of his spot and into different areas on the court. Um, Make him move his big frame a little bit. So, I think despite Wimby's dominance, they found moments to neutralize him and to score, key buckets. I think also, despite this legendary defensive performance, which, as we've explained, is heavily impacted um, or impactful, I should say. He was just 5 of 17 from the field. He just didn't really have it tonight or last night. He finished with 11 points, 15 rebounds, and 5 assists. So that's kind of filled the stat sheet a little bit, but he's just going to need to be better in game two, and I'm sure he will be. Castle and Harper, these guys are good players, man. They led the way in the first half. Um, I wrote down, Castle's good at using his ability to slash as a weapon to get his teammates involved. But of course, he was in foul trouble in this game, and I think that really hurt this team. Despite only playing 28 minutes, he almost was their leading scorer with 17, 5, and 5. Harper was the leading scorer with 18, 4, and 4 on 53% shooting. So, both of these guys really know how to get in the lane, and both guys know how to defend very well. They both have solid, well-rounded packages as basketball players. And you're looking at Vassell, he made some timely threes. He shot 50% from the field. Champagne, who had the final shot, he was balling out as well with 17 points and 7 rebounds on 58% shooting, hitting some timely threes of his own. So whether you're talking about Harper, Vassell, Castle, you're not talking about super flashy guys, but they play the right way and they could do everything on the court, which is really valuable in the playoffs because you kind of have that utility and you have that versatility to get guys in different spots and to defend different guys or to take on different offensive roles, right? That's what really leads to teams winning championships is kind of that versatility. Kind of like what we're seeing with the Knicks now, using Cat more, not just getting him in ISO or just having him shoot threes like, spot up threes. Like, no, he's getting involved in the offense. That's exactly what you want from your players. Um, that's also why, the Harden offense doesn't work so much because it's just one guy dominating the ball, dribbling out the clock. That doesn't help other guys stay warm and stay involved. And as we know, in order to win a championship, the team has to be one unit. The team has to play really well together. So, that seems to be the way the Spurs like to draft, and it works well. It builds a team that can last for a very long time because everyone has a varied toolkit, but also doesn't rely too much on the physical traits that they have. It's mostly basketball IQ and fundamentals with natural athleticism sprinkled in. So, this team was really efficient, picking their spots well, moving the ball effectively. It's just that their star struggled like mightily. But they still had a chance to win this game, like we said before. And you kind of get the sense that they are the better team coming in. But Anthony Edwards can be an equalizer, as we know. So this is going to be a fun series. I think it all comes down to how Wemby plays and Anthony Edwards. And I'd say Julius Randle too. If Julius Randle can have some big games, I think that's going to make a huge difference going forward. But yeah, I think the Wolves, honestly, they find ways to get to the conference finals. Especially in the last couple of years, they just end up being there, and we're like, how did they do this again? But they have the good pieces, man. They have some depth. They work really well as a team. They're well coached, so I wouldn't underestimate them in this series against the Spurs. Even though the Spurs are the better team and they have probably the best player on the court. Kind of hard to say, but I expect the Spurs to take game two for sure. So it'll be interesting going forward, in that Knicks series and in this series as well. I think both have a chance to go at least 6 games, possibly 7. It just depends on how those role players show up. So, yeah, that's about it. That is my coverage of yesterday's games. I'll try to come back again and deliver some more for tonight's games that we have coming up. But it's a great time of the year. We love the NBA playoffs, so we'll keep it coming for you. But thanks for watching.